Got it. Cool. Well, hello and welcome everyone to Neuroccino on this Monday morning. Today we have Sarah present her first paper to us. First paper as in the first journal club review. The way it works is everyone is welcome. Just ping us a text and you're in. You can present any type of science that got you excited. That could be a paper, a book chapter, a YouTube video, any science you come across and you're like, whoa, this is great stuff we want to hear about. So anyone is welcome. Today we have Sarah doing her first paper for us, which is super exciting in itself. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you. If you can share your screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared the link with you on the chat. Victor, if you could ping it over to YouTube, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then for those watching us over on YouTube, if you have any questions, write them in the chat and we'll bring it over here and try to answer your questions. Great.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Randerrecio. Do you hear me well? Okay. First step in virtual meetings. So I'm a PhD student who usually works in Madrid, in Spain, at the Cajal Institute in an electrophysiology laboratory. And now I'm doing the stay here in Bordeaux with Michel Thibault, learning about neuroimaging. But what it's really interesting for me because it's related with my the topic of my thesis is the lateralization of the brain. Like I like to question why do we have two hands and both of them are useful. We have two legs, and everyone knows that we need both of them to run on everything. But why do we have two hemispheres in the brain? It's like, for me, it was like the first time I asked this, it was like, okay, we have only one head. Why two hemispheres? And reading about that, I came across this article. Sorry for the colors, I'm really colorful. So it's a functional neuroanatomy of idiomatic expressions. It was carried out in 2021 in Buenos Aires. So it's about idiomatic expressions, which means that they are sentences with a figurative meaning and they cannot be translated literally. And each language has their own idioms. So because of that, some research investigation has been done in other languages such as English or Italian or Japanese or Chinese, etc. And they are really powerful, like a conceptual tool, and it depends on the culture. But in Spanish, they have hasn't been done a research about that. It is weird because it's the third most spoken language in the world. So here they try to understand that how we process the idiomatic expressions, because they are you talk and you usually speaks literally. You say what you want to say, but the idiomatic expressions are more difficult, like metaphors or poetry or irony, jokes. So how we process that? And it depends on only one hemisphere or both, or their relations. So there are some hypotheses around this topic. One is the graded salience hypothesis, which says that the interpretation of an idiomatic expression depends on the salience of its meaning. Like the most important, the most traditional, classical meaning is the first one, and that you came across, that you think about it, and then you have to, if it's not, you have to reinterpret it. Then on the configuration hypothesis, which says that idioms are initially processed literally until a keyword is recognized, and the idiomatic meaning is activated. So both meanings, literal and figurative, are executed simultaneously until the literal is definitely rejected and the figurative one is accepted. defined versus coarse semantic coding model is the one that says that the right hemisphere weakly activates broad semantic fields, while the left hemisphere activates narrow semantic fields. So the left hemisphere then chooses only one single meaning and ignores irrelevant competitors. And instead, the right hemisphere can detect distant semantic relationships by activating larger but diffuse semantic fields. And the last one here is the newest neuropsychological model of idiomatic expressions representation, which says that with a more salient meaning activate the left hemisphere, while the non-salient, the literal one, the weird one, activates the right hemisphere. And we need both hemispheres in prefrontal areas, in both hemispheres, to retrieve the figurative meaning and to inhibit the literal one. So some investigators postulate that the left is more important, the right hemisphere is more important. Both of them are important, and they need to be in relation with each other. In some experiments during the years, like if we with our TMS, if we interrupt temporarily the activity between the connection, the subjects didn't understand the metaphor. But also happened with left hemisphere subjects with the left hemisphere damage and with right hemisphere damage. So, so here was another type of experiments. They had aphasia. Okay. And also here, yes, more damage and more. To sum up, is that here with several experiments, they saw that we need the left and the right. So here in this concrete experiment, they study 21 native speakers of Spanish, 11 males, with mean age of 32 years. All of them were right-handed. That for me, like left-handed, it's like, okay, you have to study in both, in right and left. But I know that it's more difficult, and maybe in another experiment, another paper, we will see it. I understand that it's more difficult to understand everything with that. And they know that they are right-handed because they did the Edinburgh handedness inventory, which it's simply that you ask with which hand do you write, with which hand do you use the knife, with which one leg do you play the ball. So everyone was healthy. They had a neuropsychological evaluation, and well, the stimuli, how they did the experiment. So there were 35 idioms, 18 non-ambiguous, and 35 literal sentences. What I mean with ambiguous. Ambiguous is like a literal interpretation is possible. So a man washed his hands. He can be also a man who is washing his hands, but also someone who is avoiding something. With this in Spanish and the English, maybe we don't have the same sentences, but more or less you get it. And the non-ambiguous is like someone lost his head or lost her head. Unlikely in 2021. I hope, at least here. So. And there are literal expressions which only has one possible meaning. Her cousin lost his wallet, and that's all. No idioms, no figurative meanings. So the subjects had 4 options. 1, the correct, 1, semantically related, and 2, unrelated. For example, if I say my ankle screwed up, in Spanish is about a leg, we say meter la pata, which is the leg. So the correct one is an error. The second, leg, which is related. And the third and the fourth are unrelated, treatment and goal. And with literal expressions are the same. Like my cousin worked all night. The related ones are effort and darkness, and the unrelated ones are smoothness and triangle. So they did, I don't know if I have said it, they did a fMRI. They saw in a mirror the screen in the top of the sentence, and then at the bottom the 4 options, and they had to answer with the right hand. They had trials before to be better in the task, and all the sentences were like similar, subject or verb and object, and similar length and balance, everything. So here the functional, each stimuli was 4 seconds. It was each 4 seconds and during 4 seconds. And that's all. Here we have scheme to say that the idiom, the literal thing, the idiom, and another literal. And so that was all. And also there was they did a LI toolbox at the group level. They did with this equation, they get an index of lateralization. So the results, they had good performance of the subjects, everything was right. So in the end, it's like they have significant cluster. I did color things like purple bilateral, in red, pink, left, and the blue one is right. So they had the frontal cortex bilaterally, including pars triangularis of the inferior frontal gyrus in both hemispheres and the pars orbitalis of the left inferior frontal gyrus, the right middle frontal gyrus, and the left superior frontal gyrus. Activity is tended bilaterally to prefrontal areas and to the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus, as well as to the right anterior insula and supramarginal angular and fusiform gyrus in the left hemisphere. A lot of words. I know a neuroanatomy little, but I know, and it's tricky, so I usually do this. It's easier, but maybe more simpler. Okay, but it's like, yeah, in the left hemisphere, they saw more activity in the fusiform gyrus, in the superior frontal gyrus, in the angular gyrus. Here are the typical Broca and Wernicke areas. In the right, there was more activity in the middle frontal gyrus, anterior insula, and superior temporal gyrus. And in purple are the bilateral areas. So going back, in relation to the where I was here, okay, in relation with the lateral indices, if the lateral index is negative, indicates that there is more activation in the right hemisphere, and in all of the lobes we achieved negative results, saying that in overall there are more activation in the right hemisphere, which is weird because normally we say that the language is more important in the left hemisphere in the language. So here there is a discussion, but what they finally get the conclusion more or less was that we need the figurative. No, we need to to literal talking, to literal speaking, we need the left hemisphere, and with the figurative speaking, we need the right, but also the left. So we need a synchrony with both of them, and we need a connection. And more or less, that's all. I can continue, but that's all.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you for taking the time and effort to make an overview anatomy slide to
too many areas. Yeah, and sometimes they contradict each other. Like in one study is more in the left, in the other study is more in the right. And I was like, okay. So in conclusion, it's like we don't know exactly which one is more important, and we don't know exactly yet. And I think it's really important in order to, like I read in one of your papers, that to know how we recover from things, from a stroke, from epilepsy, from autism, everything, that we know better how we process the language and how because it's not only the simplest language, like the simplest sentence. It's also, for me, it's really interesting to know how we process the jokes. For example, the jokes is irony, how you know that you are saying something the opposite that you say. I don't know. So continue, ask.
It's not easy. We already have 2 hands up, so I think Patrick was first. Yes, Patrick, take it away.
Well, thanks a lot for presenting this paper. I think it's kind of not surprising that I'm asking questions about this topic. So I just go ahead and ask some. I'll start with some technical questions. Do you know if they reported the cutoff value for the Edinburgh handedness inventory?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Did they report the cutoff values for the EHI, for the Edinburgh handedness inventory?
No, I don't have. I have here.
Because they're like, the reason I'm asking this is that typically within laterality, or within especially handedness laterality research, people are quite concerned about the strength of lateralization towards one hand, to really call people right-handed. So some studies just declare everything that's positive in the Edinburgh handedness inventory as right-handed, and some studies declare the range between 40 and -40 as ambidextrous. So that would have been interesting. Then I was wondering about the presentation of the stimuli. Obviously, when you present something to the left or to the right, that goes into different visual half fields, right? So I was wondering if they controlled for an effect of the visual half field. Obviously, when you present for longer, then I think it's like 40 or 60 milliseconds, callosal interactions will play a role as well. But there's still typically a lateralization effect dependent on the site where you present the stimuli. So did they always have the same order of stimuli where they presented the literal and the figural stimuli?
Because I think so. I think that, I read about that. Always was literal, no, the idiom, literal, and there is this is in the supplementary data. They have all the sentences that they put to the subjects and in the same order, and they try to do like the same length of the sentences, the same structures, and always in the top, at the top of the screen. So
because if you always present the, let's say, the one correct answer, I know the paradigm is a bit more complex.
No, the answers, no, the answer were yes, sorry, the answers, yes.
Cool. Then some other questions regarding the imaging part for lateralization. So typically, when you're looking at both activation differences, it's kind of advisable to use the LQ instead of the LI, which means the lateralization quotient, which is like simply just divided by the sum of lateralization. But here they reported the LI. So did the lateralization index basically just the contrast between left and right? Then how did they, or did they mention something about controlling for differences in size of the hemispheres or differences in the regions or the pairs of regions?
No, or yes, but I'm not very into this. With the fMRI, the voxels, you mean, and
the region size.
The region size. The region size, they say that there was neurotan. Okay, here. The general locations and Brodmann area designations of regions of significant activation were identified by an experienced neuroanatomist. It's only what I know.
Okay. Because that basically also goes into my last question, like what kind of parcellation they actually used, or how they parcellated the regions of interest and homologous pairs. Because there's obviously like a difference between saying we have a brain that has some lobes and some regions, and we declare them anatomically as being homolog or homologous, or saying I'm looking at pairs of regions that are functionally homolog. And so far, the only approach that allows this is via using the great Aisha Atlas from our friends in Bordeaux, the Gin Lab. And yeah, so I would have liked to see like more studies actually using this atlas, because most don't appear to respect the fact that some regions, just because they are like mirroring each other, might not be homologous in their form. Anyway, I think it's still a very interesting paper, and really happy for your presentation.
Thank you. I know that they use a mask also. It wasn't Aisha. They didn't study. They excluded the cerebellum and the 5 millimeters tissue between hemispheres, and something about that the voxels and the activity 5,000 most activity pulses, but this topic is far away from my knowledge, and I didn't dig into them. But yeah, I have to study more about that.
Oh, no worries. It's not like you would. Just probably one last thing, and then I shush. But that's not technical. That's more of regarding the content. Like you're absolutely right. Obviously, the right hemisphere has to do something when it comes to interpreting the meaning of a sentence in the sense of being it figural or literal. And some researchers suspect that this might have some association with the right hemisphere being more pronounced or more involved in prosodic elements. Typically, for instance, when you talk about sarcasm or something like that. Like sarcasm is obviously just heard because of the way you pronounce the words. So I always wonder if like there would be a clever study, or you probably know of a study that combines like this perceptual asymmetry with the content asymmetry. So have you read any papers about that?
No, not yet. But it's interesting also, like how you pronounce, the sentence. How do you? Yes. I have to read about that.
Awesome stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for all the insight, Patrick. One question from me to you before I hand over to Chris is if you could educate us a little bit about the difference between the LI, like the laterality index and the laterality quotient. Why is one better than the other? Why should we use the quotient, not the index in this case?
Yeah, this is kind of like something that I always get when I try to get through with laterality index. Like some reviewer always tells me, use the laterality quotient because it respects the general coactivation between the two, or takes this into consideration, other than the laterality index, which does not look into the strength of general activation here. Hence, that's one of the biggest arguments in favor of it.
Okay. And just on the top of your head, don't worry if you don't, but would you have a reference for us to dive deeper into it?
I don't have it from top of my head, but I'm happy to send you the reference once I find it again.
Yeah, if you can share this, I'll attach it to the YouTube video so people will have the links as well. Thank you. And sorry for turning the table around and asking you questions.
No
Chris, you have a question as well.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for the presentations. It was really good. I wanted to ask, so at the end of the conclusion, I think they mention brain disorders, and I wanted to know if, so they were only healthy participants in the study, right?
Yeah, but at the end of the, yeah, I didn't say, but at the end of the paper, they said that in other papers, it has been proven that with people with less proficiency, such as second language users, elderly, autistic disorders, schizophrenia, epilepsy, they have more bilateral activation for pragmatic language. So
yeah, so then my question is, do you think it's possible to design an experiment using idioms or maybe other kind of sentences that could require the same mechanism to not analyze the sentence literally, or I mean, not only literally? Could it be used? I mean, of course, it's difficult because not everybody knows all the idioms, and also it changes between regions and stuff like that. But do you think it could be possible to, yeah, to see to use these idioms to have some kind of test to detect some diseases, or do you think it would be too noisy, too difficult?
No. I think it's a good idea. I suppose that they do it with people with autism, for example, and in some papers they say that more abstract is the idiom, more strange or more with no possible literal meaning, more needed the correlation between hemispheres, and the right hemisphere is more important. So I think it's a good idea, like, to do a test like that for people that maybe have something and we don't know what, and you can detect that.
Also, yeah, some people have a problem with the corpus callosum, so I guess they couldn't recruit these bilateral networks to process the idioms. So are they just unable completely to understand idioms?
This was it's like an old it's like an old experiment, but I came across with that also. It's like that, where the people who has problems with the corpus callosum, that no connection, if they can see they only can see one part of the screen, and they can say what they read, but they can't say if it's in the other hemisphere, because here it's in the right. Supposedly the language is only the literal language is in the left. So here they can't say anything, but they can draw it, or they can explain in other ways. Yeah, so very interesting. People with the half brain separated.
Yeah. Thank you.
I love to see that you're doing a lot of background reading to our project as well. That's great. Patrick, you have another question.
Sorry, could I add something to Chris with regards to the corpus callosum or the split brain and corpuscle agenesis? Like there are obviously also differences between people that artificially get their corpus callosum severed, right, and people who don't grow up with a corpus callosum, so agenesis patients. And I'm not sure, but Sarah, do you know of papers looking at agenesis patients and their like interpretation of figural or versus literal meanings? Because I, from the top of my head, don't know of any study, but I do think that there should be at least some compensatory mechanism in these people, right?
Yeah, they say something about that. There are some papers. I didn't read it too much for this week, but I will read it. And yeah, with in 2005, there is a paper saying that it reported that in corpus callosum agenesis, idiom's comprehension is impaired. With adults with corpus callosum agenesis, it also perform poorly in pragmatic tasks, suggesting that the interhemispheric transference of information cannot be fully compensated. So the people with a problem with the corpus callosum, and they tend to compensate the functions between hemispheres. Yeah, super interesting.
Thanks.
If I can jump in here as well. So with agenesis, it's usually a incidental finding because people who grow up with a corpus callosum have a lot less problems in everyday life than you would expect, given that the structure is huge and connects the two hemispheres. So their presentation is usually subclinical. So you usually find those people when they come in as controls and you realize not a control. Or they come in for something like a headache that can't really be explained. This is how I saw my first agenesis patient in the clinic. But what's interesting is that there is a comorbidity with other diseases or disorders. And about 1/3, I think, don't quote me, check the numbers, but I think it's about 1/3 of patients without the corpus callosum also meet the diagnostic criteria for things like autism, which we know has an impact on language and idiom understanding and those kind of things. So this is something to bear in mind, that there is a comorbidity that might actually impact on the measurements and how well we can tease it apart. And then also generally for agenesis, because it is an incidental finding, it's hard to get large numbers because you can't put out a call saying we're recruiting people who don't have a corpus callosum. You have to rely on the data that you happen to have available because they were just identified. So things like population-wide studies like the UK Biobank or other similar large population-based databases are fantastic because you actually find those disorders that usually wouldn't be available in high numbers. Just to add.
So, Steph, I know that you know a lot of this, so if you could also share with all of us some papers, I would be really grateful.
Gosh, you're a quick learner, turning it around. Fair enough. I dig out the papers and had them. Well played. Great. Okay. Any other questions? Nothing I can see. And I already heard the bonnies over the ocean from the other boat. So it's definitely 10 o'clock and time to call it a day. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next Monday with the next Neuroccino. Any volunteers are welcome to ping me a text and say which paper you're interested or ask for help finding a paper. And until then, I wish you an exciting week in science and see you next Monday. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.